Hey everyone, so I'm going to do a quick mini series on Amazon Web Services, which is obviously a huge topic. If you look at the page here, the number of services is just kind of growing all the time. But it's something I've been playing around with for a while, and it's very exciting. It's very cool. I was at a training course on Friday, all about mobile technology, and I just sort of want to put together a few very basic videos showing some of the suppose the services that might be most commonly used for somebody who's actually building, let's say, a mobile applications using an Amazon web service backend or something like that. So um, the thing I'm going to talk about today is a specific use case where we're going to use DynamoDB from Amazon as a NoSQL backend. I'm not going to go too much into what NoSQL databases are. If you want to know, then let me know, and either ask me a question or if you request, I'll make a video on it. But DynamoDB backend database. Then what we're going to do is we're basically going to expose that backend via a REST API using the Amazon API Gateway so that we can actually query that data and push data into that database through RESTful APIs. We're going to see how you can design those APIs, deploy them on different dev, QA, and prod like environments, and then test them from your browser or from any HTTP client that you want. So I'm going to try and keep this quick. I've already actually shot this video today, and the stupid ScreenFlow tool kind of just trashed the thing for me, so I have to do it again. I'm going to try and keep it a bit quick, and as I said, any questions, just let me know, and I'll go into more detail. There is a lot of documentation on this stuff. The Amazon Web Service documentation, it is pretty good, but a lot of it is, let's say, a lot of it is missing one or two key kind of subtleties that you really have to get to make the examples work. And so it took me quite a while yesterday, for example, to sort of put together this and find all the permissions that you need. I'm going to link them all down below, so you can basically just copy them and paste them right into your own project. So hopefully that's going to save you some time. Okay, so let's get started. So basically, this is the home page for the Amazon Web Services. Now, the ones we're going to be looking at, as I mentioned, are DynamoDB, IAM, so that Identity and Access Management. You use that for everything because everything's very tightly and very sort of granularly permissioned, if that's a word, in AWS. And then the API Gateway, which is what we're going to use to actually expose the DynamoDB to the outside world. Let's just quickly have a look at DynamoDB. I just want to sort of highlight, for those of you who haven't seen this, how easy and seamless Amazon makes it to actually create a database. I mean, literally, you do everything from the browser here, and if you want to add a new table to your DynamoDB account, you literally just do create table, right? And so create table, you basically give the table name and a primary key, and that's it. So being a NoSQL database, it's much less restrictive about what columns and how you structure the data. I'm not going to go into that too much, but we've got a comments. To save time, I've created a comments table. So basically, let's say it's some table storing feedback from users about some news articles in a newspaper or something stupid like that. So if you look, we've got 3 records so far that I've created in this table. Right, so this is already data in our database. So we click on this. So this is basically how it shows the contents. Okay, so that's really that. The one thing worth mentioning is that, as I said, everything in AWS is very sort of very tightly controlled in terms of permissions. And if you look at the Access Control tab for this table, you can actually select certain operations like put item, query, update item, and you can hit that Create Policy button. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a JSON object, which you can then use to paste into the policy documents, which will be used to actually assign permissions on this table to certain roles or certain users, and I'll talk about that right now. So that's really all I need to show you about the DynamoDB. I'm happy to do more videos on DynamoDB if that's of interest, but this is more about just getting some data in there and then finding a way to throw the data at it and query it from the web or over HTTP. Okay, So the second part is the IAM, right? So the IAM is the Identity and Access Management service suite for AWS, which is responsible for managing all of your resources, right, and the permissions. So pretty standard stuff. You've got users, roles, groups. Policies is worth talking about. So policies, basically everything in AWS is managed via policies. And if you can see, these are all sort of default policies that Amazon have created. So in order to allow people to access, or services or anything, to access my comments table in DynamoDB, what I had to do was I had to create a policy, and I called it comments put item. Okay, so I created this new policy using the create policy there. Okay, and then if I actually click that and see what the policy is, you can see, so this is basically that same JSON syntax, and it describes what people who are assigned to this policy actually have access to do, right? So for example, we say, so this policy defines that you can call the put item and the query operations on DynamoDB service on these objects, right, on these particular resources. One is the table itself. This is how they refer to the table. So each asset in AWS has what's called an ARN. It's a bit late at night for me. It's basically, I think it's Amazon resource number or something. Anyway, so everything has an ARN. So users have an ARN, roles have an ARN, database tables, everything has a sort of a unique identifier like this. So we say, right, so these operations can be performed on these resources. The reason I have this one above here with the asterisk is because if we go back to the table, so if you see so again we're under our comments table. If we see indexes, then there's an index on this table called page index. Now that's a separate object in its own right. Therefore, to be able to query this table, we also need to explicitly assign permissions to that index object. So if we go back to IAM console, you can see that any other indexes and sub objects underneath comments will be caught by that wildcard, and then this one is for the actual table itself, right? So that's the policy. Then obviously, we need to talk about roles, right? So basically, the policy has to be assigned to a user or to a role. We're going to use a role for this particular example when we come to use the gateway, API Gateway, right? So I've created a new role called comment role, right? I created this using the create new role button. So if we click on this, now, so roles, as I mentioned before, you can assign policies, you can attach policies to roles, right? And I attached, you saw the policy I created just 30 seconds ago. So I've attached that policy to this role. So if we show policy, there we go. That's the same permissions that we've just discussed there. Okay, so that means that anybody belonging to this role, any user assigned to this role, will basically be able to do the things declared in that policy. Right? And that's really all we need to know for this example. I will mention one other thing, which I'm going to paste down below, and that was pretty tricky. You have to define a trust relationship for this role, right? And I'm going to show you what I mean here. If I edit trust relationship, I'm going to paste this down so you can paste it into your own example. You have to put this entry here, which is basically what you're saying is you're allowing the API Gateway.amazonaws.com service. You're allowing it to basically to perform the things that it needs to do to basically to act on this role, right? Sorry, that's not a very good way of explaining it, but it's a formality that is required in order for the API Gateway to be able to execute the permissions defined by this role. Okay, hope that made some sense. Just paste it in the document and get on with it. All right. So basically, then that's really it on the user side or the role side. So we do need to define this role. The tutorial that I mentioned that I used to follow. I actually went through a tutorial on this and checked off the steps against it, and it's very good. I'll link it down below, but it does skip this step, or it says, okay, you have to make sure that you do this, and it's not exactly clear what you have to do. So this hopefully does that work for you. Anyway, so now we get to the more interesting part, right, which is the API gateway stuff, right? So I'm going to go back to my middle window here, and I'm going to select API Gateway. And this is where it gets really interesting. So I think I would say that for those of you who don't know anything about REST APIs or the HTTP protocol in particular, I'm not going to basically go into it in depth here. If you want me to do a basic video on that stuff, I'm more than happy to. If you just leave a comment and request it. So under APIs, I can create a new API. This one is my existing comments API, so I've already done the spade work for this. I'm going to click it. Now, this is where the magic happens, really. So under here we have first of all, this is basically going to be our URL path, right? So we're going to be calling some URL to identify the host for the service, and then we're going to be there's going to be a /comments, which defines that the request is for this particular API. Now, underneath and attached or associated with the /comments path is the post method, right? Which means that so we have two methods here. One is a post and one is a get, right? Now, what we're saying is if you just supply /comments and you execute an HTTP post against that URL path, then that enables you to put in the body of the HTTP request some JSON request objects which are going to represent comments that we want to insert into the database. Okay, so this is a kind of like a high level overview of the flow of information. So here's our client. This client could be a browser. It could be like a mobile application. It could be anything. It's going to send this HTTP post across to AWS. Then the API gateway is going to intercept this request at this stage here, and it's going to prepare the content of that request and translate it into a form that the DynamoDB service will then understand. DynamoDB will then insert that data into the database. It will return a response back to the API gateway, and that in turn will initiate a response coming back all the way to the client. Okay, so that's the flow, and there's a very similar workflow for the get method, which we'll show in a second. Okay, but so one of the sort of finer points of this is I mentioned we do some translation here to actually reformat and get the request ready to forward on to DynamoDB. So in this screen, what we do is we say, right, the integration type, which means what do I initiate by sending a request into this API? I initiate an AWS Service Proxy, which basically means I'm going to then kick off another call to one of the AWS services. Just worth pointing out that DynamoDB, and as with anything in AWS, is exposed already over a web service. However, there are certain advantages to basically wrapping that in an API Gateway API, especially which I'll explain when we come to talk about the GET. So what we're going to do is we're going to invoke an AWS Service Proxy. We specify the region in which our DynamoDB is deployed. Mine is somewhat stupidly hosted in the east coast of the United States, but that's fine. HTTP methods. So it's worth pointing out also that these DynamoDB web services, they only support HTTP post, so that has to be HTTP post. And what's the action we're going to do? We're going to basically call the put item function on that service, right? So we're going to call put item on DynamoDB service. Now, so let's just quickly go back to DynamoDB and show those actions again. Remember, so put item there was a function that you perform on the database, right? And we also saw in the management console we saw that put item had been assigned as one of the operations that this role is allowed to perform, right? So I hope that makes sense so far. So we're going to call the put item function. Now the last thing we have to mention is that what we're going to do is we're going to intercept the request coming from the outside world on our external facing API Gateway API. We're going to intercept that, and we're going to apply a mapping template to the body of the request, okay? And the content type, we're going to say it is going to be JSON, so we're going to be expecting a JSON request format. And if I just click that and expand it, I can see we're basically going to take whatever JSON the external client supplied, and we're going to basically transform it using a template into a format that the actual internal DynamoDB web service, the put item web service on the DynamoDB actually understands. So here we specify that the table that we're going to be inserting in is comments, right? So we're hard coding that. So we don't tell the user what table to specify in the request. That's hard coded in the request that we send on to DynamoDB, and that stops anything nasty happening, like the wrong table getting updated. You can enforce that this is the only table that's going to be updated by your external API, which is actually another good reason for basically creating this wrapper API, right? Then you're going to basically pick out certain fields from the original request and then put them in the basically unchanged in the request that you send on to DynamoDB, right? So if I just come out of there, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just test this, right? So the great thing, so if I just go back to method execution, so this is back to our screen, which shows the flow of requests from the client all the way to the server and then back to the client. So what we can do is we can test this, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to I've got some JSON already prepared there. If I'm just gonna put a new ID in there, right? And then I'm going to say I really enjoyed this YouTube video, which I'm certainly hope is the case. So basically, I'm going to test this now. So when I hit test, this client is sending a post request to my new API, and I get a console log here, which is nice, right? And the response body comes back as empty. That's expected. If we go back to our DynamoDB, hopefully we can see a new item being inserted in the table there. If we just hit refresh, fingers crossed, and there we go. It is this one. I really enjoyed this YouTube video. So we've already tested our API to send a new record into the DynamoDB database, which is, I think, pretty cool. Now, let's just to hammer home the concept. Let's just show how the permissions work. So if I go back to the IAM console, right, and I go back to my policies, and I find my policy, right, and I'm going to say I'm going to temporarily, if I just change this to some kind of typo, sorry, I have to edit it first. Right? So if I just change this, right, to a nonsensical thing, right? So that resource doesn't exist now. If I do this, okay, I need to delete. So for some reason, it only allows you. It's a good thing it keeps the versions of your policies as you edit them, but it only allows you to keep 5. So interesting little side note there. So if I delete some previous versions, then I go back to the default version, and I'm going to edit that again. So policy document, and now I should be able to validate and save. Right. So now if I go back to my API Gateway, right, and if I test this again, I'm going to put a different identifier again, and test. Then I get a message saying that this role that I'm using is not authorized to perform DynamoDB put item on resource, and there's the ARN unique identifier for this comments table, right? I didn't actually show you where you specify which role you're going to use. It's very simple. So you basically just go back to the post method. I go back here and here, and so so one of the fields I missed out. So when you're actually specifying how to call your internal sort of forwarding on invocation of the DynamoDB service, you have to specify the role which you're going to execute this as, and so this is where you just go to your IRA management console, go to roles, pick the role that defines the permissions that you need, and then you can copy the ARN from there and paste it in there. So that's how you tell the API Gateway, use this role to execute the service, right? So if I then restore this back to its former glory, like this, and if I go back and test this again, test, then it comes back with no error. And if I go back to my database, I'm sorry to be a bit repetitive, but I just want to really kind of hammer it home. Okay, then you can see the new record, right? So that's that for the post. Okay, so basically that's for this is your API method for inserting data, and that will be called with the URL path ending in just /comments, and that's why the post is under there. I can add different methods to the /comments path just by doing actions and then create method, and I select method down here. If you notice, these are all the HTTP methods, and this is sort of part of the whole RESTful thing, that you're using HTTP verbs and actions to sort of piggyback on the HTTP protocol to actually send and receive your data, right? So moving on to this thing. So what does this thing mean? It's basically, so after /comments, there's another slash, and then page ID. Page ID is in curly braces, and what that means is that page ID is going to be a parameter, right? So your typical URL is going to be like /comments /front page, right? To see all the comments on the front page. So it's used as a query parameter, right? And so that's what the curly braces mean. And then, so under that path, so under /comments /page ID parameter, we've defined a new method called get, right? And get is a standard HTTP get. We need to set this service up just like we did for post, right? So again, very similar path of execution. We send the get request from the client. It's going to go all the way. We're going to intercept it and do something here, do something quite cool here actually. Then that's going to go to DynamoDB. It's going to query the data, and it's going to bring it back, and we're going to do something coming out as well. On the way out, we're going to transform that data into a way that it looks a bit more pretty for the client, and then that response will then be sent back to the client. So this, again, nothing happens in this stage, but in integration request, which is where we basically say, okay, the request has come in to the API gateway. What we're going to do here is, again, we're going to call an AWS Service Proxy, and we're going to call the same service or the same service family, which is DynamoDB. We are going to use an HTTP post to call the DynamoDB service, because again, all the DynamoDB services have to be post, right? So they're all HTTP post, even though our wrapper service is an HTTP get. And this is one of the things that I want to explain. This is why this is quite cool, because HTTP get means you can just basically, you can send a request from your browser with an HTTP get with your query parameters in the URL, and get a response back in the browser window, which is quite cool. You can't do that if you just call the DynamoDB service directly. You have to use an HTTP post, so you can't actually just use your browser bar as the initiator of the request. So we're going to be calling, once again, a same database. We're going to be calling HTTP post, and this time we're going to be calling the query service. So the put or the post was calling put item. Now we're calling query on that on this service, right? And we use the same execution role as for the HTTP post, right? That execution role, as we saw, has permissions to do DynamoDB.query as well, right? So the other thing we do is we are going to do some transformation as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the the page ID parameter from the HTTP GET request. In this case, typically we'll just pull it from the URL. So the HTTP GET request, you can just use the request parameters in the URL, and so we're going to basically pull that in, and we are going to encapsulate that within a JSON structure and send that in an HTTP post to DynamoDB. So this is the format that the DynamoDB service itself is expecting, and what we're doing is saying, okay, pull this page ID out of the URL and insert it in a JSON request body, and then send it on. So that's quite cool. Then what happens is that goes to DynamoDB. DynamoDB is going to query the database. It's going to come back, and all we have to do here is we say, right, when we call this DynamoDB service, it's going to come back with certain HTTP response codes, right? We've only defined one here, which is basically the success code, 200. And what we're saying is, when the service comes back having succeeded, then we are going to do some more body template mappings, right? And what that means is nothing else is changed here, but we're going to select, we select application JSON as the format, and if we click on it, we can see what we're doing here. So what we're saying is, DynamoDB has given us some JSON in the response, but it doesn't look very pretty, right? So what we want to do is present it in a way that looks a bit more attractive to the browser, as we'll see when we test it. So we just basically apply another one of these templates. It's going to iterate over all of the records that's returned from the database, and it's going to sort of frame them in a nice JSON format, and then send it on. And that's really that. So if we can actually test this now as well. So we go back to method execution. So we can test this first of all in the same window. So if we do, first of all, let's just pick one of our page ID values. So let's pick the one we just created. So page ID. Okay, let's pick this one. And if we go back to our API Gateway, and we're going to test the get method, right? So click on get, click on test. And because it's an HTTP request, sorry, an HTTP get, my apologies, we can't specify anything in the body. So all we can do is put a parameter in the path, and we're going to put our sample page ID and hit test. And then we get back, basically we get two comments coming back. So it's queried the database, and it said, give me all of the comment objects where the page ID is breaking news story with this date, right? So that's quite cool. Just again, I'm going to illustrate another one of the nuances about the permissioning. So if we go back to the IAM console, now remember I said that we have to permission all of the sub objects. Okay, so if I do just put some nonsense in here, right? Comments Bob, and save that. Right now, if I do this, I come back here and I test again. Now I'm going to get a message saying that this role is not authorized. If you look down in the console window here, this role is not authorized to perform the query on the resource comments / index / page ID index. So that's one of the sub objects of the comments thing. So that's just to show you that how important it is to make sure that your permissioning covers each and every resource in your database, right? And I'm sure, I mean, there are probably, well, there definitely are best practices and shortcuts around how to do this best, but just something to be aware of, because if you think that you're going to automatically be able to query a comments table just by permissioning a table, then just watch out for that, right? I'm going to sort this one back again and just make this a wildcard so that it picks up everything once again. And okay, I've breach the versions again. This is quite annoying. I don't know why they can't just store as many as you want, but there you go. So they're back to here, and validate policy, valid, good. And then if we go back to our gateway and test again, then we've got the permissions, we've pulled the stuff back. So that's all pretty good, but how would you actually, it's one thing to be able to to run little tests from a little GUI here, but how do you actually deploy this API into a way that your external applications can call it, right? Or even you can just put it in a browser and call it. Well, that's all about deployments, and I'm going to show you that now. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically, if you look at so under the comments API, there's something called stages, right? Now I'm going to create another one just to show you. I did this one earlier, and as I said, I shot this video earlier and then lost the video, so I've already got an example. I'm going to do another one just to show you. So under stages, the stages are basically the different instances of deployment of your API, right? So so you can have, if you like, different versions. You can have one that's deployed as a dev version, one deployed as a QA, one as prod, etc., etc. Right? So and they can all, the point is they're all different. They can have different properties, etc., etc. And if I create a new one, I'm just going to call it YouTube 2, like this. So it's creating a deployment. So creating a stage. So now I have YouTube 2 as a deployment as well, right? So each of these, the best way to illustrate this is that each of these now has an instance of each method, and if you click on each one, for example, if I click on the get method, it gives you the actual URL that you use to call this method or this service. And if you look at the URL closely, the stage has actually become one of the elements on the path, right? So that's how the URL identifies which stage, whether you're looking at production or dev or QA, right? And the last thing you can do, so obviously this is now a public URL, so you can basically you can invoke this service just by using this URL. If I just so page ID, right? We're going to have to specify a page ID. So if we just go back to our DB and let's pick a page ID. Yeah, we've got the same one there. And if we do, so if we just basically click this URL, obviously I've just clicked it, and I'm going to have to go back and copy it again. My apologies, it's a bit long-winded, but bear with me. Like this, and go back to here. I'm going to just tack that page ID onto the end there, and there you go. So this is pretty cool, right? So I've just executed this by literally banging this URL into my browser, and you can see the full path. So it's the YouTube 2 staging environment, and then it's the comments API, and then this is my page ID parameter, and that has then initiated a GET request on my API, and it has gone to DynamoDB. It has pulled out these elements from the database, right? And then what it's done, sorry to jump around a bit, but it's basically it has then transformed that JSON in a if I just show it, so it's transformed that JSON here so that it looks more attractive in the browser, and you can actually see it in the browser window. So that's really kind of everything I wanted to go through. I will paste everything down below. As I said, there is good material on it, but some of the stuff, especially about the policies, is a bit tricky to get first time. So hopefully this takes that pain out of it. I will be continuing this series on Amazon Web Services. I think it's a very, very exciting topic. So I hope you like it. If there's any feedback or anything, or any topics you'd like me to do next time, I am doing, about to kick off a blockchain series as well, but I'm going to keep them in separate playlists. So hopefully that won't be too irritating. And if please bear with me on that. There'll probably be some random Brompton videos in there as well. But thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.